Look at the weather.
It's beautiful here.
Non-stop rain.
Oh, man, it is a blazer out there.
It's cold and it's shivery.
It is cold.
Really coming down here.
I really enjoy your weather reports.
From the All Indiana Podcast Network, we're talking weather in a whole new way. From historical events to what's coming up, plus weather news, science, safety, fun facts, and more.
I like where this is going.
This is Weather Weekly. Weather Weekly with Wish TV Storm Track 8 meteorologist Marcus Bailey.
It is Weather Weekly on the week of April 22nd. I'm your host, meteorologist Marcus Bailey. Thanks for joining us for another week here on the All Indiana Podcast Network. We greatly appreciate it. We're going to have kind of an abbreviated show here, but I think we have a good subject matter. I'm going to be talking with my coworker, Steven Diana, here at Wish TV about the severe weather outbreak that actually happened the last week. If you were listening to the podcast when we talked with Cody Murphy, it was Severe Weather Preparedness Week, and we had our first high-risk day of 2021. It's been actually the first high-risk day we've had in almost a couple of years, and that's nationwide. So we're going to kind of recap that. We'll skip over the what you missed because obviously that was the big thing that we missed in the last week, and we'll spend some time on that. But I think in place of what we missed here in the week that we were away, I did want to bring up some weather news, and I found this interesting. There's a good article from the Washington Post that was posted on Monday, so on April 22nd. For those of you that are listening to this a little bit later, you can Google search this, and if you actually just search for GFS upgrade, it's one of the top articles on Google when you search this. But if you're a big weather nerd, you know about what the GFS is. For those of you that maybe don't know much about weather models, what we do in when we're forecasting weather is we look at a lot of different models, okay? Some in the short range, some that would only go out maybe 48 hours max, some a little bit less than that, like the HRRR. It's a much higher resolution model, and something that we look in the short term, specifically for severe weather. It updates every hour. You may go into more of a medium range forecasting tool like the North American model. We call it the NAM, N-A-M. And then you've got some that go deeper into the medium range. All right. We won't necessarily call them long range because you do have models that go way, way, way out there months in advance. But these can go out to maybe 240 hours in advance. And it's the GFS and the European model, or the ECMWF. Those are kind of the two biggies here. The GFS is an American model. It's gotten a big upgrade here that just went live at 8 a.m. Monday morning, the 22nd. And we're kind of looking forward to this. We've had some previews on some various sites that have already kind of plugged this in. It's known as version 16.0, 16.0. For this new GFS. And there's not a lot of new features, if you will. What scientists kind of do is they're plugging in a lot of different algorithms to try to make this model a little bit better. All right. For those of you that aren't in the know, for a very long time, the European model has been far superior to the GFS, or the American model, for a number of reasons. And scientists are still trying to kind of figure that out a little bit as to why. But the European model seems to just handle a lot of bigger situations a little bit better. It goes to a lot of different arrays. It could be with tropical weather. It could be with snowstorms. That's where we really feel it here in the Midwest, is where it handles things just a little bit better, it seems, when it comes to winter weather. And so it's going to be interesting to see how the GFS kind of plays out a little bit. What's interesting is now the big feature that at least I noticed, and there's a write-up about it here in the Washington Post article here, that they've increased the amount of slices in the vertical. So I say this when I go and talk to schools. You want to measure the atmosphere kind of like a cake, right? You just don't want to know what's happening right at the surface. You want to know what's happening from the surface all the way to the top of the atmosphere, and everything in between, okay? And so the previous run of the GFS had 64 vertical slices, if you will. Now they've upgraded that to 127. So the thought process is that you're going to get a lot more information, and you can kind of fine tune a little more on the data that's coming into the model, where it's ingesting it to in these vertical slices, that you're hoping that your data outcome and the output of these models is going to be a little bit more accurate than what it previously has been. I think it's interesting how they kind of get some of this data in here. This comes straight from the Post article. Latest upgrade focuses on addressing some additional biases. The upgrade adjusts how initial conditions or current weather information are ingested into and processed by the model while integrating more sources. I think this is important. More sources of data from weather satellites and ordinary aircraft. So they're actually slapping some weather instruments there on some aircraft, and that's going to be factored in into how these models kind of initiate themselves. Now, you have to remember, the GFS only updates 4 times a day: 0Z, 6Z, 12Z, 18Z. If you don't know what Z stands for, it's Zulu time or Greenwich time. And so now that we're in daylight saving time, we are 4 hours behind those specific times, if that makes sense. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of all pans out. Previously, you didn't get some of that data coming in. What you specifically got were balloon sounding data that would get factored into some of these initializations of the models and stuff like that. So going to be interesting to watch. It'll be something we'll keep you updated with here. There's been kind of some mixed reviews on how this has kind of handled things. NOAA is excited with, NOAA's excited with a lot of the possibilities that this is going to be handling stuff. They're really excited about the global ocean wave model. It's known as Wave Watch 2. Should provide for better marine forecasts, particularly with regard to water waves driven by the wind. And then also they're hopeful that this is going to do better when it comes to tropical forecasting as well. So a lot that we're going to be checking in on with the GFS. I know it gets kind of nerdy here, but we're a nerdy podcast. So if you didn't have an interest in weather, then why are you here, right? But love to hear your feedback on the GFS. It's still, at least what some of the reviews that I've seen, and I haven't done my own personal gauge on this, but it seems like it still isn't quite up to the European model yet. But I think it's important that we're kind of taking those steps at least, right? We're getting there. You just want to have a more competitive model. It seems like sometimes we get to a point where we just kind of want to throw out the GFS, and you're kind of solely relying on one model when you're getting, past beyond 3 days of forecasting, and that can be a little bit frustrating at times. So if we can get an American competitive model here to kind of play ball with the Euro, now you're helping to kind of get more accurate forecasts beyond that 3 to 4 day stretch. We always say on air, it's, once you get past kind of 5 or 6 days, boy, a lot can change, right? It's tough. So maybe this is hopefully the beginnings of we're getting to a point that maybe we are getting a little bit more accuracy when we're getting into that medium range forecasting of 5, 6, 7 days out. So that would be a good thing. That would be a real good thing. We feel pretty good about a lot of the times the 1 to 3 days out. But when you get beyond that, it can be a bit of a crapshoot. So we'll keep you updated on that. But we do want to spend some time on the bulk of this on the severe weather. We're just coming off of Severe Weather Awareness Week. here in central Indiana. Tornado drills went off on Tuesday. From what I could see, it went off without a hitch, so we were in good shape there. But we had kind of our first outbreak type day in the United States last Tuesday, and it was interesting. It was a high-risk day, so that's when you typically see those long tracked large tornadoes. We did have a lot of tornadoes reported down in the deep south, so we're going to talk much more about that with my guest and my friend and colleague here at Wish TV, meteorologist Steven Diana. That's next here on Weather Weekly. Welcome back to Weather Weekly, this Weather Weekly podcast focusing on the severe weather outbreak, kind of the first one that we've had for the season that occurred last Tuesday. As we were recording our most recent podcast, that would have been Tuesday, the 16th of April. I'm meteorologist Marcus Bailey, joined with my colleague here at Wish TV, meteorologist Steven Diana. Steven, welcome back to Weather Weekly. It's good to have you again.
Hey, Marcus. It's good to be back. I'm loving it. I've been looking forward to coming back on the show. And I heard the last one with Kaylee Plucho. That was quite a wild story. And just from the perspective of a person who went through that violent line of storms in August, that was something, of course, to remember for who went through that. But, Marcus, we're going to, of course, like you said, talk about the tornado outbreak from last Wednesday, which was we'll break down the details, but the way we were leading into it, it looked a bit scary. It did.
It did. Well, and we'll dive into this when it comes to the forecasting details. And thank you for correcting me. I said Tuesday, Wednesday. It was last Wednesday.
Oh, you're good.
I've got all my days mixed up here, but yeah, I mean, it's an interesting, and you and I can kind of discuss on how the forecast kind of rolled along, and if it was, warranted a high risk or not. It was certainly an active day. Lots of tornadoes reported in Mississippi and Alabama specifically. Kind of walk me through, before we get to the actual events, Stephen, kind of walk me through. I think there's some interesting things when it came to the forecast. So I believe really this kind of got on people's radar probably by the end of the weekend, that prior Sunday or maybe Monday morning, when they started issuing some of the risks from the Storm Prediction Center.
Yeah, roughly the end of the weekend, I started seeing mentions about how an overall setup in the southeast could lead to some activity by, say, midweek, and Sunday had a day for the Storm Prediction Center issues many outlooks for many things like fire hazards, floods. Severe weather is one we focused on quite a bit here, of course, because that's what we usually we look at the most. That's what we have to deal with the most around here, and along with flooding. But on day 4, which would have been Sunday of the 14th, there was a day 4 30%. Day 4 through 8 features a 15% and a 30% outline of severe weather potential within 25 miles of a point. Now, here's the interesting fact about this. I'm going to quickly explain this real quick. 15% would mean at least a slight risk would get issued once you got to day 3 categorical outlooks, like the level 1 through 5 stuff. 30% is an enhanced at least a level 3 out of 5, and that's what we were doing with by last Monday. And then, Marcus, by the time we got to Tuesday, it became pretty evident that this was looking like this could be a potential severe weather outbreak that featured several intense tornadoes and potentially long-tracking tornadoes as well. And then by the time we got to last Wednesday, St. Patrick's Day, I mean, I'm telling you this, Marcus, last Tuesday, I looked at the models early at work. I wanted to quickly do that because I had a little bit of time. And I'm thinking, we're going to need a higher risk. We're probably going to need a higher risk. And I was afraid to say that because it became pretty clear models were trending towards a serious outbreak of tornadoes. And I was nervous about it. I'm not going to lie.
It certainly looked that way. And I think, to your point, before we actually get to what unfolded that day, obviously, when you're into a moderate risk, which is a level 4 out of 5, you're at a high risk, which is extremely rare, 5 out of 5. That's serious. But I think, to your point, what the Weather Service or Storm Prediction Center specifically has been doing in the last couple of years is having that day 4 and day 5 risk, the 15 and 30% that you were talking about. And it's interesting. I know you weren't on the phone yet, but the lead in before the break, I talked about the upgrade to the GFS that went live Monday morning at 8 a.m. And I mentioned, I was like, look, those kind of models just aren't there in terms of where you have just such a high amount of confidence when you're getting to like 5, 6, 7 days out. Maybe we'll get there one day. Maybe this is the beginning with this upgrade of the GFS, that it's the beginning of some good things that you're going to be able to get in the medium range. But, that far out, it's tough. 3, 4, 5 days out is tough enough. But I think we're at a point now in forecasting that you can kind of gauge at least a few risks. To my point, having a 30% on day 4 or 5 is pretty significant. And I think it also goes to show what a great job of forecasting the Storm Prediction Center did, because they were eyeballing this. And not just the Storm Prediction Center, but the weather community as a whole kind of did on this 5 days out, because you had a lot of ingredients coming together. There were still some unknowns, but as you said, it did look pretty nasty, even 5 days out. So for that to kind of ring true says a lot about where we're at in terms of progressions of models and how well they kind of handled the whole situation last week.
I agree. I noticed that a lot too. I do want to bring up quickly an example of what you were talking about. I think I even saw a day 6 30% on a storm chase trip from 2 years ago in May. That stuff really is significant. You don't get that very often. When you see something like that, usually you're thinking, okay, we're looking at probably something pretty serious down the line, of course, with this and the models, how they kind of all came together with the whole entire system setup. It was really cool to see how it kind of all lined up and how well this was forecasted in advance. Like you said, it shows how far we've come, and I'm only looking forward to the future of being able to better forecast these events. By the time we got to day 1, I had to wake up real quick early that morning because I had to go to the bathroom.
So day 1 would have been Monday. So day 1 would have been Monday, right? Yep.
Day 1 would have been Wednesday. So on St. Patrick's Day morning, had to get up real quick. I immediately looked at the day 1. Of course, the weather geek I am, and that we both are. And I was not shocked to see a high risk. I'm thinking to myself, okay, there's a high risk there. I'm not surprised. 30% significant tornado threat, which is high, which is something you don't see a lot. And when you see that, it looks daunting, but it's also with the general public. When they hear stuff like this, it's like they'll get a lot of this and we'll get nervous, but it's like we tell them, be sure to have a tornado safety plan ready. Don't be nervous about, think through it. If you execute your plan, you'll be okay. But yeah, that morning though, high risk got issued. But then, Marcus, what I was not quite expecting, I will say I didn't think about it at first. Like when we're talking about even more rare tornado risks, like the 45%, 60%.
Right.
Fun fact, 60% is only being used, I think, twice. One of them was back on April 7th, 06. By the time we got to the 12:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, day 1 update, they expanded the high risk into central Alabama to include Birmingham overall, and I'm thinking, well, that's just great, isn't it? Because you don't want to see, as a meteorologist, you don't want to see a high risk in an area like that because they have a lot of violent tornadic history. Look back at years like 1977, 1998. But
98, you think of 2011, April 27th?
Yes. Thank you. That's another notable year there, too. One notable difference with this update, and I mentioned it in my group chat that's filled with weather buddies overall that I went to school at the Ball State. I'm thinking, man, it sounds like we're heading towards that 45% significant tornado threat, and they sure did put it in here in this update. That's a risk that does not get issued often. That's like the second highest tornado probability there is overall, 45% with that significant hatching, meaning also there could be the threat for strong tornadoes. This included Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Columbus, Mississippi, Starkville, Mississippi, North Fork, Alabama. It was a small one, but still, it's like, that's
it was significant. It was significant, and I think it's good. It's good to point out too for those that aren't the weather nerds and they're not sure what we're talking about. When you have the way that this SPC basically defines when you're in that area that Steven's talking about, you're at a 45% area. The 45% means that you have a 45% chance of seeing in this case, tornado within 25 miles of a point. So you're almost at a 50-50 shot of seeing, if you're in that bubble, that you're going to be seeing a tornado within 25 miles of any given point there. He mentioned the hatched area too, which means that there's a 10% or greater probability of I believe it's what they defined an EF3 or greater in a hatched area. Is that correct?
EF2 or higher.
EF2 or higher. But within 25 miles of a point. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So and that's pretty significant. Because look, here's the thing. Tornadoes are extremely rare, which then goes to another point that significant tornadoes are significantly rare during tornado season. So tornadoes are rare. EF3 or larger are really, 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 really rare. It's why they make so much news headlines. Well, that and because they do so much destruction, but they just don't happen very often.
Correct.
So coming into Wednesday afternoon, this is what, as a forecaster in the Deep South, you were kind of staring down the barrel at. You were looking at several tornadoes, likely, and a few of those could be of that EF2 or higher strength, essentially.
Yeah, and the scary thing, too, with the parameters there, too, it even suggested the threat for even possibly violent tornadoes, and those are the really rare tornadoes. Right. Those are EF4 plus. I'm thinking to myself, man, this is not going to be good, because there was just so much energy in the atmosphere. The winds aloft were strong, and when we talk about wind shear, it's the changes wind speed and direction with height. An ideal shear profile would be towards the low levels. You'd have winds coming out of the southeast, veering upwards for them coming mainly out of the west towards the upper levels. That's an ideal wind shear profile for, like, if you're wanting to go storm chasing or looking at models. But when you see that as someone that this area has so much tornado history, and you see these towns that from before were demolished pretty much, you have that pit in your stomach, and sure. I'm thinking, man, we're going to have another, but also too, when you're in the broadcasting world, of course, and you're down here and you're staring down that barrel and you're in this zone, you have to concentrate. You have to be on your toes. That's why guys like James Spann down here, and also in Tupelo, Mississippi with Matt Lapon, these guys are, sharp and to the point. They don't let this stuff phase them, because you can't let it phase you. The public relies on you to keep your composure during events like this.
Yes,
so
I agree. Yep.
Yeah, and that's just pretty much something that's a point I wanted to add too, because there's just so much that goes into this stuff, not only with the forecasting standpoint, but also when you're talking about the general public overall, and how you get them to not be afraid about this stuff. There goes along that aspect too with the broadcasting side of things. So of course, we're focused more on what happened with the overall system overall. So Marcus, things got started off pretty early in the afternoon. I also saw some images on Twitter. I'm not sure if you saw this or not, but there were people posting images of clearing skies. I'm like, that's not a good sign.
Right. That was fuel to the fire. Yep. Not good.
Fuel to the fire. And so, also too, looking at soundings, there's this other thing we have called the cap, or it's basically, here's a good example. You're in your kitchen cooking, right? You have a pot on the stove, and you have to set the lid on whatever you're making. Basically, that lid is your cap, and it's holding in the parcels from keeping it from rising into free unstable air. And me and Marcus had a good conversation about this, because Marcus, where he used to work at in Illinois, there was a day where it was like a heightened risk. And Marcus, I remember you telling me you flat out brought a lawn chair and you just sat outside. You kicked back. You're like, yeah, I'm waiting for this cap to break, and you're just like, this thing ain't gonna break.
Just did not. I called it literally called it the cap from hell, because it just put a lid on everything. We had every ingredient known to man that we could have had a really nasty day, and the cap kept a lid on it. And I don't know if we even had much in the way of rain that day. That's how bad it was. It was basically just cumulus cloud trying to build into a thunderstorm that just got shredded apart because it just couldn't bust through this lid. So it happens, and that's what I think. To that point, Stephen, is it goes to show that you have to have everything go right for severe weather outbreaks to even happen. It's not just one thing, or it's not just two things. There is a laundry list of things that have to go a certain way for an outbreak like what happened last Tuesday, or any other of these other outbreaks that we cover. You have to have a lot of things go in a certain direction to make that actually a reality.
That's right. And a lot of the times they don't come together. There's always all it takes is like one little thing that's different that can bust the whole event. Sometimes it can be mysterious too. It's like sometimes you're thinking, well, why did this not happen? I mean, like you said, the cap, that's a good thing the cap broke. It's, because like you said, it was looking like it could have been a nasty day. Same thing with last Wednesday. So the activity started off pretty early. I saw cells forming down near southern Mississippi. And from what I saw with recent higher res models like the HRRR and the RAP, I saw that there was cell initiation southern Mississippi through central Alabama. They were talking about not just one round, they were talking about like 2-3 rounds of this. And the worst of it they were talking about was at nighttime, which I'm like, at that point, I'm like, wow, this doesn't sound good at all. When like the low level jet kicks in, that's a jet that's about a mile up above us in the atmosphere, and we look at that. That's one of the more important ingredients for like tornado development. And they were showing like 50 miles per hour through there, which would help with the development of strong tornadoes. The picture was looking grim, but, got to, focus through each round. Of course, the first round, early afternoon, I saw early on there was a tornado that had developed. I want to say it was near the town. It was east of Laurel. It was towards the border of Mississippi, Alabama. And debris was being kicked up a pretty good distance, unfortunately. But I didn't hear of any fatalities. So I get to work, and I see more cell development in Alabama. Things were already starting to kick off the fence pretty much at this point. There was, early on, a particularly impressive tornado, and it was near Ottawaville, Alabama. This would be just west of Montgomery. James Spann was already live because there were tornado warnings within the vicinity of ABC 3340, like the southern fringes of the viewing area. There was this wedge somebody caught like in an more open field, and of course that's rare down there in the southeast because there's a bunch of trees and hills and all that. You can't see tornadoes very well in Dixie Alley, but on this day particularly, you had some photogenic tornadoes, which is quite rare for the southeast market.
Sure.
And it's like wow, like these are going over open fields. That's great to see, because God forbid one of these tornadoes hits a town. I mean, we'll get to part of that later, but this tornado was impressive. I don't recall. I think it was weaker. I think they rated it like weak because of it not hitting much substantial structures, thankfully. Then we got more cells firing off, getting closer to Tuscaloosa, Birmingham. Also, some tornado warnings were going on near like Selma, Alabama, Campbell, Alabama, like southwestern, like Alabama-ish. The next tornado that became of concern would be the cell that was coming up from like south of Tuscaloosa. And this had a classic supercell feature. I say classic, it like had the hook. We saw the intense precipitation towards the front of the cell, like the hail and stuff. And then the tornado dropped, and all of a sudden it started quickly materializing into a stronger tornado. And this was coming up like into the southeastern fringes of Tuscaloosa. I'm thinking, can we not do this today, please? Right. It was getting closer to the campus of University of Alabama. I don't think they got hit. I don't think they did, thankfully. I mean, they got hit on April 27, 2011. Part of it did. And it's like, you just hate to see a repeat of it. But there were, I think this is also where, like, Moundville also had taken a hit, too. There was some damage. I think they rated this tornado EF1 or EF2. Okay. And what I heard also too from after that tornado, thankfully, the great news, Marcus, there were no fatalities. I think there were a few injuries, but the big thing, no fatalities. And what else, Marcus? You know what I saw too? And I think we touched base on this too a little bit, like when I was on one of your other previous episodes, with tornado safety. And James Spann showed this on the air. There was, I think they had one of the reporters at like a sports goods store, and all the bike helmets were gone. I'm like, people were listening, actually. It's like, wow, this is just amazing to see. It's
fascinating to see the reach that James Spann has in his market, and not just his market, but really anybody that kind of even halfway pays attention to weather, that does more than just like what's it going to be like. If you really geek out about severe weather, you know who James Spann is. And we could spend a lot of time on each tornado that kind of developed that day. I think some interesting points here, Stephen. We got, I believe, I don't know how many we had, but I know there was at least of one. There could have been 3 PDS tornado watches that were issued for that day, correct?
Yes, there was there were 2 or 3. I remember the first one in particular because I wanted to mention this. Thank you for mentioning this too. With the first particularly dangerous situation tornado watch, which they are very rare. We don't see them very often. Probabilities for tornadoes were almost maxed out. I hadn't seen it this high, maybe even since May 20th, 2019. It was like, wow, like 95% chance of at least like 2 or more tornadoes, and then like 90% chance of strong tornadoes at least. Right. Like, wow, you don't see that very often. Like, conditions were there. That just goes to show what the parameters were in place.
Here's something that's interesting here, and let's hit up on the final numbers here, because, like I said, we could spend a lot of time, and I do want to spend some time on the coverage because I thought it was exceptional. Of course, it was. I watched Spann most of the time, but I also watched JP Dice, that is basically Spann's competition. He's at the Fox affiliate in Birmingham, and he's a very good meteorologist as well. And I like their coverage as well. And I'll kind of break down what I saw because I had them both going on at the same time last Wednesday. But some of the numbers here, Stephen, and this is over a 3-day event. Okay, so from the 16th, so that was Tuesday. Wednesday was the big day. But this actually carried over a little bit into Thursday as well, out east, parts of Alabama, parts of Florida, mainly Georgia and the Carolinas. Kind of got the brunt of the severe weather on that following Thursday, but the heart of the system was that second day. It was the Wednesday, St. Patrick's Day. 22 EF0s, 22 EF1s, 4 EF2s. But here's the interesting thing, and this is where I want to kind of get into discussion with you about. 0 EF3s, 0 EF4s, 0 EF5s. So my question here is to you, Stephen. My question is, high risk day. We had 48 tornadoes. Do you think, and I think, there's no right or wrong answer here. I think this is a good debate to have. Do you think high risk was warranted?
I think in this particular case, with what models were showing, yes, because of the strong dynamics with the winds, and then the moisture. Like, we're talking dew points. Dew points is the amount of moisture in the atmosphere. I'm seeing the numbers at the surface like approaching low 70s. That's just going to make those storms mad.
Right.
And then you had a lot of instability, build up unstable air, especially in southern Mississippi. I think the higher risk is warranted. Now, just like you said, Marcus, it's a good debate. You'll get like these high risk setups, but of course they're not going to always verify. Of course, there's been a lot of high risk busts. It's just like we talked about just recently. Like, there's one little thing that can mess up everything. But I think in this case, given how dangerous it could have been, I think it was warranted. Now, one thing I will say that saved the day, especially for Mississippi, with the second wave, there was going back to cap. I didn't notice a substantial cap. When you have a very good cap in the atmosphere, like one that will hold for a while, then eventually breaks, and you get that really good cell development. This one was weak. It wasn't really much. It seemed like once that it wasn't strong enough to keep cells more discrete. I just kept seeing a bunch of like these storms firing off in southern Mississippi. Kind of reminded me about May 20th, 2019. We had that happen too. There was just a bunch of cells just firing off, and it just kind of killed the overall unstable air in the atmosphere. Of course, when storms basically interact with the atmosphere and mixes it and stabilizes it more, that was one of the big reasons why Mississippi pretty much got saved that day. You had that squall line push through. There were some thunderstorm warnings associated with it. Yes, I mean, severe thunderstorm warnings. Those should be taken just as seriously because straight line winds and stuff. But in terms of the tornado aspect, it saved Mississippi from potentially having an even bigger potential disaster, because that's when the low-level jet kicked in at its maximum. And that's when everyone was talking about, like, oh, wait for the nighttime hours. And, you know, I see some meteorologists saying, hey, it's a great thing, though, that we saw this bust because of what the forecast could have, what the outcome could have been. Now, also, too, with the ratings, it's important to mention how we rate tornadoes. I think some people not everyone knows how tornadoes are rated, unfortunately. I shouldn't say unfortunately, but just overall, general public does not know that tornadoes are rated. Now, they're rated by the damage they do. It was more basically loosely based on wind speed back when we had the Fujita days, the F scale. When we got to enhanced Fujita in 2007, the goal was to have a more like a realistic context of the tornado itself, like what it actually did and stuff. Like the wind speeds were like more tightened down. Back then it was like really wide range wind speeds and like really high ones too. Of course, EF5 wind speeds are now just basically when you attach a wind speed to it, if you rate something a 5, it's 200 plus. Right. For instance. But in this case, a lot of these tornadoes were more or less over open land. One example I do want to mention, this is a tornado this is probably one of the more intimidating tornadoes I've seen as of recent. This is one that happened near Campbell, Alabama. This is where there was like continuous, Selma, Alabama, for instance, was under like multiple tornado warnings.
Right. I remember their name getting called out quite a bit.
Yeah, it's like, oh my gosh, when does this ever end? I mean, it's like those people are just like, oh, not again. Right. But there was these chasers that got into a very good position, and I mean, like, there wasn't much. It's from the sounds of it, there wasn't a really good road network down there, if I recall. They got into a very decent position with this one. There was a PDS tornado warning on the storm at that point. I thought, oh wow! So I'm just as I'm watching the line of storms while I'm doing my work at work. A photo came from the tornado, and this thing was it's just this big bowl that's sitting there, and just moving on through, like over more open land. I thought, man, that looks violent. That's the first thing I think I said.
Right.
I sent to my group chat. One of my friends, I want to bring this up. He's a meteorologist in Central West Virginia, very smart guy, Joseph Williams. I'd like to try to get him on here too at some point
Sure.
as well. Like you were talking about getting more guests on here, I need to do that as well. That'd be pretty cool. He was like, do you remember like old historical reports of like people calling tornadoes fog banks? I said, yes, I do. He said, that's what this kind of looks like. I thought, you know what? That's a very good point, because that's what it kind of looked like, this low bowl, wide bowl on the ground, just moving through like grayish, kind of like darkerish. That's one tornado I wanted to bring up of the bunch that happened. But I think a lot of these moved over more open land. There were a few that did move through more populated areas. And also, too, Marcus, northwest of Birmingham, there were a couple tornadoes as well. This couple cells just kept trading each other, dropping tornadoes. But the overall outcome, there were no fatalities.
Yes, I mean, it was
a large part of that.
Yeah, and I think I think that's and that was the best case scenario.
Yes,
and I kept hearing Span say this a lot during his coverage, but I thought the same thing to my head. It's just like these storms would fire up. They'd spin up a tornado, but it just didn't seem that they couldn't really get their act together beyond that, which I found interesting because of the conditions that were available. I mean, it was ripe, right? It was ripe for the picking for these things just to become pretty bad storms, and it just didn't happen.
Yes.
What I did think was interesting, though, and I think, there'll be studies that, I mean, that's what the nice thing about meteorology is. It's like people think, well, you screwed it up. The forecast was off, and look, the forecast wasn't off. I think when you are talking 48 tornadoes in a less than 48-hour span, I think that warrants a high risk. Now, whether or not you get an EF3 or higher, people can debate, well, you didn't get a major destructive tornado, but look, it's to your point. If any of these tornadoes would have hit a more populated area, it would have been a little bit of a different story that we're talking about now than what we're actually talking about. But again, back to my point, it just never seemed that these tornadoes could get going. And I think part of that was the temperature profile was interesting over the state of Alabama. I don't know if you remember this or not, but northern Alabama, I don't think ever got out of the 50s the entire day on Wednesday. They had what's called cold air damming. Okay, so essentially, that's colder air that rides in from the Appalachian Mountains, and it filters in to the Carolinas, to parts of Georgia, into Alabama, and so they were very chilly. And places like Birmingham kind of was like on the boundary line of much warmer, soupier, more unstable air, and where that cold air damming was taking place, where it was colder, the dew points weren't as high, and the air was a little bit more stable. They didn't see hardly any severe weather up around, say, Huntsville on Wednesday. And Huntsville and Birmingham aren't that far away from each other. So I think that probably played a little bit of a role in why things maybe didn't escalate to where they possibly could have by Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday night. And to your point, I kept thinking, they're not out of the woods yet, because the whole front hasn't even moved through. They could have some pretty nasty storms when the main line moves through, and that really didn't end up being the case either. There was a couple of warnings when that moved through Alabama, but not like a significant outbreak type of thing. The main event ended up being kind of the isolated discrete cells that developed Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah, that's a good point you made there too. I noticed that cold air damming. I didn't think too much of it though. I was kind of thinking, I see it's there. And then of course you got the main system, the warm front that lifted northward, which would provide the pristine warm sector that was in place. And I mean, it was a very large one too, kind of similar to what we're looking at with this Thursday. Well, we may touch it.
We'll talk about that in a second.
For sure. Yeah, but it's like, with that, like we talked about too, the main overall, the best part of the setup overall hadn't arrived yet. I think that also played a role in why these tornadoes weren't as strong potentially.
Sure.
And that's a great thing, though. It's like with these staying more over open land, and usually in Dixie Alley, it's like they don't stay over open land. They're like, when we think of these tornadoes, they're usually hitting places, and it's just sad to see. It's like, but again, the great thing about it is like the warning process worked, and we would like to see every event like this have no fatalities. It's just, unfortunately, it's not going to end up being the case overall. There's going to be outbreaks where there's unfortunately people that lose their lives, and it's just sad to see. But like I said, though, it would be just a godsend if every single one of these had people that everyone lived overall. But
right.
It was just great to see that, and I'm so happy to see that we've come so far in the weather world. That's one of the big reasons why I love this business. We see models improving. Mm-hmm. Of course, they're going to have their silly trends.
Right.
I mean, it happens.
Right. But
you and I both know, Mark, especially with you being in business even longer, you started in the business in like the mid 2000s. Things were way different even then.
Why you gotta call me out being old, man?
No.
but you're right. A lot, even in that. I mean, it's not short. I mean, it'll be 15 years in the business in October.
Wow.
But man, I mean, the things that have changed just in the span of 15 years, just in the span of 10 years, is crazy. It's phenomenal. And this is such a technology-driven business. And as the technology gets better, I think the forecasting will absolutely get better. So I think you only go up from here. That's the good thing. So there's a lot of exciting things to take away from this. But like you said, too, sometimes you have to have a little luck. And I think that there was a lot of that in play on Wednesday, both in where these tornadoes developed, mainly in most cases unpopulated or very sparsely populated areas, and that we just couldn't get over that threshold to see like that monster stovepipe, long-lived, long-track tornado that could have happened. Now, all that said, they're kind of under the gun for another round, possibly later this week. So we're recording this on a Tuesday the 23rd. The 25th could be another active day, basically in the same areas, right?
Correct. And it's like, this reminds me of last year in April where the Easter Sunday outbreak happened, and then the following week there was a moderate risk in literally the same place, and it's just like, oh, we're going to go through this again. Right. Thankfully, that didn't quite materialize as much. Although there was one violent tornado, that definitely is better than, I don't know how to really word that, honestly. It could have been a lot worse, I'll just say it that way. But this risk overall, which does include us actually here in central Indiana, which I'm not too kind of surprised. I don't know. I think it's just because of the unstable air factor with that. But there is a level 3 out of 5 risk already in place across most of Mississippi, a good chunk of Alabama, which does include Birmingham. It does include Jackson, Tennessee, Memphis, Tennessee, eastern Arkansas, northeastern Louisiana. So you have kind of a broad enhanced risk, potential for some significant weather. This is what the Storm Prediction Center says in the summary. A potential outbreak of severe storms, including strong tornadoes, large hail, and damaging winds, will exist Thursday afternoon into the overnight across a portion of the lower Mississippi Valley and southeast states. So it's not, this one's going to be interesting because with this, Marcus, I'm noticing a potentially even stronger low-level jet.
Oh, yeah. Well, and that, before we get too deep into it, I want to take a step back because you mentioned the marginal risk we have in central Indiana, and I think that goes to that strong low-level jet. For instance, the NAM by 18Z, so that would put us into the heart of the afternoon here on Thursday, has the low-level jet. It's mainly in southern Indiana, and so the marginal risk is the southern half of the state. state, but it has the low-level jet at least peaking in southern Indiana over 50 knots. So that would put us pretty close to severe wind criteria if you're thinking these storms can knock some of that low-level jet wind down to the surface. So I can see where the marginal risk is coming from. But to your point, that jet streak, that low-level jet pegs at like 70 knots, basically near the Birmingham area by late Thursday afternoon. So that's obviously gonna create some issues.
Oh yeah, I'm seeing mentions that this definitely overall looks even more potent than last Wednesday, which is something that we don't want to hear, of course.
Right.
Of course, you have your uncertainties. Again, one of them is that cap. Is it going to be strong enough? I mean, I've noticed sometimes with these events down here especially, the cap isn't very strong. Like, for instance, April 13th, 2019, there was a moderate risk in Louisiana. There was the enhanced in Mississippi. Louisiana didn't get much, but Mississippi kind of got hammered that night, especially eastern Mississippi. I do remember that night very, very well. I saw some of the most notable hooks I've ever seen in my life that night. But this one, there's some people I'm seeing on social media that are very concerned about this. And of course, I get that, but there comes a point too where it's like, are some models possibly overdoing it? And I said this before the phone call too. I'm like, I feel like last night I was looking at the NAM, which is one of the more higher res models. I'm like, this thing looked like a snorted line potentially, because this thing was kind of going off the hook last night.
Sure.
Now you got more models kind of coming in line. It's like, oh boy. Let's just pray that. I mean, my prayers were answered last week, and I hope they're answered again this week. Of course, I mean, such a prayer the night before and stuff of St. Patrick's Day, and I'm going to do it again Wednesday night. So It's like, can they be answered again? It'll
be interesting. Again, we're still far enough out that we're not getting really the entire story yet.
Right.
But I think some of the key takeaways. I think temperature is going to have a bit of a say to it. From what I'm looking at now, the NAM's only pumping out that they get into the mid to upper 60s. But to that point, they have dew points at about the same, at mid to upper 60s. These will be extremely HP. I think precipitable water is well over an inch and a half. So those are going to be big time HP supercells. The Cape isn't screaming at me. It's between 600 and 800 joules. So, but to that point, back in Mississippi, it's getting over 2100. So there's going to be some energy there. So it'll be interesting to see. But I think it's definitely not a slam dunk yet, but it's definitely something to watch. And I think history says a lot more, because you've said this several times today already. This is an area, especially this time of year, that is extremely prone to tornado outbreaks. Dixie Alley has become kind of the it's not good chasing country, so chasers don't want to go down there, but for lack of a better term, it has basically become the new tornado alley. It seems like it's much more active than sometimes Oklahoma or Kansas will be in April, May, June, when they get into the heart of their severe weather season in the central high plains. So Dixie Alley is fair game, and they are certainly no stranger to tornado outbreaks, especially over the last 10 to 20 years. Exactly.
With the two, and this is true as well, this area has had more strong violent tornadoes overall. And it's a good point that James Spann made in a video, basically discussing at that time the 1 year anniversary of the super outbreak. Of course, you just can't see these tornadoes very well. Of course, like you said, Marcus, it's looking like an HP event, so it's like, why would anyone want to chase down here?
Right.
It's like, you're going to have some crazy people that are like, let's go down there, dude. It's like, dude, you realize what you're getting yourself into? I mean, you're talking like potentially big tornadoes. Like, for example, the one with Bassfield, that was one of the scariest tornadoes you can have, honestly, to have happening, because of how wide it was, how strong it was, behind trees. You can't really see the whole thing anyway. It's like, wow, it was unreal. But there's not that good chaser video overall down here too, and it's like they don't get as much publicity. That was the term I was looking for.
Sure.
They just don't get that much like overall moment in the light overall of like viewing stuff. And I think it's important to understand what this area has been through. Mississippi's had, of course, for example, some of the most memorable tornadoes of all time, like 1936, 2011, 1971 in the Mississippi Delta area in Louisiana. There's just so much. And we're not saying that it's going to happen again. There's going to, like we said, there's events that are going to bust. There's something that's going to be off. And there's a lot of people down here too, Marcus, and you've probably seen this a lot on Twitter. People will be like, oh my gosh, it's going to be April 27th again. The answer is no. Simply put, no. That's the simple way to put it. That's a generational event, as James Spann says. It's a once in roughly 40-year event.
Right.
Could there be something like down the road, like Easter Sunday? Yes. Every once in a while, could you get something like that? Yes, but that's a rare event too. It's rare to see stuff like that. But if you, like, say, for instance, like James Spann said, if you have a tornado come down your street, that's your April 27th. Like, that's your day of remembrance for a tornado overall.
Right.
April 27th, again, yes, it's its own category. It's not a good comparison point, in my opinion.
Well, and to his point, what he said is, look, if you went through, there could be like a day like last Wednesday, which didn't create a lot of damage, but if your house was damaged, that day could have been your April 27th. That day was just as devastating as it was for thousands of people on that horrible outbreak that Alabama had on April 27th of 2011. So, you have to kind of put it all in perspective too, because I think, again, and I think Spann makes a great point on this a lot. And I think, meteorologists on a whole try to convey this, that no two events are similar. And that's not just severe weather, that's winter weather, that's wind events, that's hurricanes, that's anything that's significant. No two events are going to be alike. And so, I get it. It is human nature for us to say, is this going to be like this day? I think probably we don't have a lot of severe weather events like that here, that people probably remember all that well, where you had just towns wiped out and fatalities everywhere. And we've been lucky in Indiana that we don't have a day in recent memory like that. But to kind of put in comparison, I think probably the blizzard of 78 would be the most comparable thing that in a lot of people's lifetimes that are still around now. Anytime we get a big snowstorm, for instance, the 10 plus inches that we picked up in Indianapolis this winter in that one day event, a lot of people were like, is this going to be like the blizzard of 78? Or they compare it to the blizzard in 78 and they say, this is nothing. This is horrible. This wasn't a big deal. But again, you have to keep in mind that it's situational. It's different for everybody, and it doesn't make it any less impactful. So it's not a good practice, not a good policy to try to compare apples to oranges, I guess is probably the best way to say it, because they're all different and unique in every way, and they all present different challenges and dangers.
That's a good way to put it. Every event is going to have its own characteristics. It's important to just understand that, we got to just focus it with that and not be like, making that comparison. We got to focus on what its own thing can be.
Right.
Like you said with tornadoes, one event in particular that does stick out to me, and it's always going to stick out to me, it's our most impressive tornado event in state history overall. If you're talking on the scale of like outbreak overall in terms of the number of tornadoes in one day, it's not April 3rd, 1974, although that was violent in itself. June 2nd, 1990, I think, is a date that is kind of overlooked in this state, and it's for more southern Indiana. I mean, the entire state was under a higher risk this day. There were 37 tornadoes. Several of them were violent, rated going back to the Fujita scale days, F4, and one of them tracked 100 plus miles, starting in Illinois and finished off in southern Indiana. In these tornadoes, there was just a lot of energy, winds in the atmosphere overall. That's one where it's like, it's something really rare to get something like that. I mean, that's like a once-in-a-lifetime event in our state in particular. If you wanted to focus on our state's history, June 2nd, 1990 broke basically multiple records in one day. Like most tornadoes in a month, most tornadoes in a year. 1990 is like kind of one of the standard bearers for tornadoes in our state. Not to say that there hasn't been, we've had a decent history of violent tornadoes, and Central Indiana overall hasn't had a violent tornado since June 11th, 1998. This particular twister actually touched down 3 miles of my house where I currently live. And my dad actually followed it for a bit. I've seen video of it recently. I'm kind of like, wow, I didn't think I'd ever seen video of this or photo of this tornado. This thing was skipping along in Hancock County and just hopped over 70 and went towards Greenfield. But it's really rare to get something like that around here, and I feel like 1990 is one of our standard benchmarks that's kind of forgotten about. I don't really see much mention of it. But that's, like I said, not to say push over like 1974 or March 2012 in Southern Indiana.
Right. All right, Steven, I don't want to go too much longer. We've been at it for an hour. We could talk a lot about this, and we may need to revisit, the potential for the severe weather on Thursday, but it just goes to show that, severe weather season's here. We just came off Severe Weather Awareness Week last week here in Central Indiana, so people need to be ready. And you and I talked about it the last time you were on the podcast with me this could be a bumpy ride this spring for a lot of areas, especially the eastern half of the country, which would include us. So yeah, you brought it up. Make sure you have a plan. Make sure you practice that. Talk about it with your family, your friends, your coworkers, all that kind of stuff, because it can creep up on you pretty quickly if you're not paying attention.
Correct. And it was great to discuss about this stuff, Marcus. Always is, like you said, talking about for a while. But yeah, make sure you have that plan ready. We're about to come up on our peak season of severe weather, which is April through June. Right. The Cialis is right now, and we just have to be prepared. If you are prepared, you will be okay. You're going to be just fine. We'll get through this together. And that's something that should be also mentioned more often on the air. We're going to get through this together. It's going to be okay. Right. Just execute your safe plan, and you're all good.
All right, Steven, people want to reach out to you on social media. Where can they hit you up?
I do have a Facebook page, Steven Diana. I have a V in my first name. There's a couple of ways, of course, to spell Steven. You also have the PH, but V is in my name. WX, that's my weather page. And then on Twitter, you can follow me at Steven A7X Diana, no spaces. My profile picture is me running. I'm a runner. That's a little fun fact about me, too. I love to run, but going to run after this podcast, too. Not bad weather outside. Breezy, too.
Good day for it.
Yeah, man.
Beat the rain out.
Beat the rain out. I'm just so glad we got past February, man.
Right.
Another story for another day, but... Yeah, and also, too, on Instagram, Steven D_WX98. I think I get the WX and D flipped up, but yeah, that's where you can find me on social media overall. And Marcus, again, thank you, man, for having me on here. Great to talk to you about weather, man. Great to talk to all of you about the weather. Yeah. I love to do it. I could go on all day about it, but we love to give you guys information about things. That's what we're about, too. We want to be that helping hand in this business. It's so important to engage with our audience, and I hope you guys get to enjoy this better mild air overall we have been experiencing. Of course, the rain, sometimes people don't like the rain. I get that, but
hey, man, it makes my lawn green, so I'm not going to complain.
That's true.
That also means I have to go out and mow pretty soon, but it does look nice and green, so I'll take it.
Whatever. Yeah, you're right.
All right, Steven, good talking to you. Thanks, buddy.
Hey, good talking to you too, Marcus. Thank you very much, and you're welcome.
My thanks to meteorologist Steven Diana here at Wish TV, my co-worker, for all of the great knowledge of what took place last week down in the southern Gulf states. And here we go, right? Severe weather season underway. And we may have a few more weeks here of some pretty rough weather. So we will keep you updated, of course, always on our website, wishtv.com. And if you don't have it already, our Storm Track 8 weather app, a very useful tool as well. We're off next week. It is spring break. So we'll be taking a break, but we'll have much more heading your way as we move into the month of April right here on Weather Weekly and the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Discover more from Storm Track 8 Weather and Wish TV. Online at wishtv.com and when you follow Wish TV on Facebook. Plus, be sure to check out more great podcasts from the All Indiana Podcast Network now at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.